Well, my legal name is Karen Wendy Nurse. Karen means purity. I believe I remember that's what it meant. It's my given name. It's starting to feel like 74. It did it for a while. I didn't in my 70s. I wasn't feeling like I was in my 70s. Feeling like, maybe 55, 60, but now I'm starting to feel like things are slowing down a little bit. My knees. My knees are not bad. My knees work pretty well at this point. Thank God. Wanted to tell. My parents are from Trinidad in the West Indies, both born and raised in Trinidad. Um, yeah, both of them were born and raised in Trinidad. Good question. I was born in 1949. My brother was born in 1948. I think they came like in 1947, and they left 4 children there. They stayed pretty busy with child rearing, child baby making. I did not. I did not visit Trinidad until I was about 18 or 19. It didn't take me that long. My parents never took me there. I found out later on in life that my other sisters were taken there. So I was kind of like, are you kidding me? How'd that happen? We didn't get to go. Mom and dad, my mom took, I think, 1 or 2 of my sisters together, who are like 13 and 12 years younger than me. Well, I know no knowledge of my dad at all. My dad was the strong and silent type, but my mom had 15 brothers and sisters. My only knowledge of them growing up was that my mother was very good in sewing, and my mother was also liked to sing, and she was also a pianist. And she was one of the older children, so she was kind of pampered from what they kind of explained to me that, she was kind of like looked up to as an older child. Yes, my grandmother had 16 children, 2 sets of twins. Yes, all through her physical vehicle. Now, remember, this was back in let me see, this was back in like 1917, no TV, no radio. So, I don't know. Stuff got done, children got made. I grew up in the wilds of Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn was a tough town, I would say. Although I really felt very safe growing up in Brooklyn, and I lived up until I moved to Washington, D.C. I lived in Brooklyn my whole life. And I felt quite safe there, but it was rough. You had to be kind of a tough kind of person to grow up in New York. Not just because you're black, just because that was that kind of place at that time. I think as a teenager, I began to realize that New York was really quite a large place, and that it didn't just end with Brooklyn, but it was a 5 borough state. There were millions of people there. My childhood was, I kind of classify myself as a person who was pretty adventurous. That's the word. I was really adventurous. I never had my own pair of skates. I was always borrowing somebody else's pair of skates. So I learned how to skate on their skates. I didn't have a bike, so I learned how to ride on somebody else's bike who was very willing to let me ride on their bike. I made friends with people who were quite interesting. Like I had one friend who liked to go around to the funeral parlors. And in New York at that time, you could just go into a funeral parlor, go and the names of the people that were lying in state. So she would go into the funeral parlors and say, I want to see my uncle so and so and so and so, which wasn't her really, really her uncle. I'd be following right along with her. And she liked to go in there and touch the dead people. And so my spidey sense was like, I don't know them. And even if I did, I wasn't touching them. So, that was part of an interesting New York experience that I had. I liked growing up in New York. I wasn't, a person who made a lot of friends, but the people that I did make friends with were people who I trusted, who I felt comfortable with, who I felt safe around, and who looked out for me. I was a latchkey kid, which basically meant that when I came home from school, we came home, the person who owned the building let us in, TV babysat me and my brother until our parents got home. and we had a lot of free time and free range of our what we did, which a lot of what we did, parents didn't know. No, both of my parents have passed away. My mom and dad both died from complications of diabetes. Diabetes is rampant through my mom and my dad's family. On both sides of my family, mom and dad's side, their siblings actually were amputees due to complications of diabetes, including my mother's mother, who um, was amputated due to diabetes, and a lot of that was due to the Caribbean diet. I would say very heavy carb diet, and my father was a baker, my grandmother was a baker. They were very much into breads and things of that nature. So sweet breads and stuff like that. So I was not. I ate just like they ate, and loved it, enjoyed it. I felt blessed to be able to be exposed to the Caribbean diet, actually. So no, I everything they gave me basically I loved. And my father was a chef, so he was a great cook. I did not have a nickname. I actually don't know who named me. I just assume it was my mother, but I'm not sure. I grew up with very limited knowledge of what a GPA is. And so in high school, what was I like in high school? I was not popular. I was very mindful of who I connected with. I was always very mindful of people I connected with. I had I say a spidey sense about it. I had two boyfriends in high school. One that didn't work out too well. He had thoughts about things that I was not really trying to be involved with. So I just kind of had to let him go. And then I had my boyfriend. I was 16, and when I was in high school, he was the one. He was, I would say he was my first love. Totally fell for this guy. He was a year older than me. He went to all boys high school in New York and Brooklyn. He was a boyfriend. He used to come and pick me up from school, carry my books, He's a very big jazz enthusiast, like my dad. So, he exposed me and helped me to understand that. I had one of my good friends that I had in high school lived on the same block that I lived on, like 2 doors away, and we would go to school together. And she was a very dear friend to me. I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. So high school was kind of like you went, you did your work, come home. I was a good student, but I wasn't an A student. I was very conscientious about making sure I got my work done. I think that's how I was in high school. New York was the type of place where you had to, even though I felt safe there, you had to be mindful. I knew of pedophiles that were in my neighborhood I'd be running down the street and they'd be calling you, and I was a child. And again, my spidey sense went up, like, I don't know you, I don't get in cars with people I don't know. So I had a couple of experiences like that. Not registry and not even a knowledge with that word on it, just knowing that there were men around that would abuse young. You had to kind of know. Again, that's when my antennas went up. Like, you just don't get in cars with people who you don't know, or somebody's calling you from cars, Yeah. I didn't go to college right out of high school. I actually didn't even have an ambition to go to college out of high school. In high school, I was told that I had a really good grasp of English, the subject called English. I'm going to English. And that's the only subject that I knew that I was good at. But when I was about to graduate from high school, I got this letter from the Department of Justice asking me to come to work for them. And that's when I knew I had good clerical skills. I was a good typist. I didn't know that as a student in high school until I got this letter and they wanted me to come to work for them, which is what I did. I went to work for the Department of Justice in Brooklyn, New York. That was my first job. It was a good job. When I did go to college back in 1972, that was like 71. That was after I had a few jobs. After I left the Department of Justice, went to work for Bethlehem Steel, which at the time I didn't even know there was one of the top steel companies in the country. I did very well there. I met a gentleman there who wanted me to come to work for him in another company, which I got fired from. And then I stopped working and went to college. And when I went to college, my goal was to become a teacher along the lines of gym, and like a gym teacher. So that I started studying along those lines. And I was, interestingly enough, as a non-A student in high school, I was on the dean list in college. So it kind of like took me some time to kind of get my footing, get a sense of who I was, feel comfortable with the knowledge that I'd gained from being out in the world. So, taking off that time to go to college, I think was a good thing for me. I didn't finish, but I did well when I was there. Brooklyn College. I was a Brooklyn girl. Never left Brooklyn. Never lived anywhere else but Brooklyn. Absolutely. My first trip was to Canada with my sister, who I lived with for 7 years. I was probably about 18. My next trip was to London. I had a sister that was living in London, who I thought was all of that and 10 bowls of chips. Because she was traveled. She traveled to Iran. At the time it was Persia. She was very knowledgeable about things in the world. And when she came back to America, she was the reason why me and my other sister became vegan. Because she was like, look, our parents were diabetic. We're not going out like that. We're not going to eat no meat. We're not going to do this and that and the other. So, we were like, she knows so much, so we just followed behind her like little puppy dogs. And so then after I went to London to visit her, and I had an auntie there. I had actually 2 aunties and some uncles there. When I got back, then my sister and I went to Trinidad. Best time ever. She's about 4 years older than me. 4 or 5 years older than me. Okay. Yeah. I had and don't ask me how I developed this, but I developed a mode of thinking about what I thought a good friend was. And there wasn't a whole lot of that around. After I got out of high school, I made friends in my jobs. And that was few and far between. But the friends that I made, they were really good friends. They were just people that I stuck with for years and years and years. My mother had 9 children. Actually, my mom had 10 children. One of her children passed early on in their life, like as a baby. Oh. So I had 3 brothers and 5 sisters. Now I have 2 brothers and 4 sisters. One of my brothers passed very early, and had a sister that passed away last year. The one right after me, who was 12 years younger than I was. They think it was drugs. They really couldn't tell because they found her very late after her passing, and there was a lot of decomposition and all of that. I must have been about 15, and I was in high school. I think I was I was a sophomore in high school. That relationship didn't last very long, maybe about 2-3 months. That was after I graduated, he went into the military, and we were still boyfriend and girlfriend even after he went into the military. But once I graduated from high school, that relationship broke up. He cheated on me. He came and told me, and he actually told me because he was going to have a child with this other person, whom I did not know. He was quite a charming guy, so I kind of understood why he would do that. I didn't expect him. I actually expected him to live up to his duties and responsibility as a father. People liked him. He was very, he was a very personable type of guy. Even when I was with him, I could tell that there were other ladies, young ladies out there that were attracted to him. We broke up on very good terms. I didn't see him a lot after that, but he eventually passed away. He was very much into had these guys that into drugs. I was into people who so he's very much into drugs, and he passed away, I believe, due to drug abuse of drugs. Very early in life, he had to be in his late 30s, early 40s. He did have and went on to have other children with the same person. So he actually introduced me to marijuana. So he was smoking marijuana for some time. I didn't get into smoking marijuana till later down the road. So that was his first introduction into drugs, and I think it just escalated. He interestingly enough came from a very large family as well. He had like 3 sisters and 5 or 6 brothers. They were all into some form of marijuana or cocaine or something of that nature. It was pretty well advertised in the media that, there was an epidemic of drugs going on. Not really, not in my everyday experience and with people who I was connected with. I was connected with people that snorted cocaine and who definitely smoked marijuana, but not to the level of it being addicted, them being addicted to it. I actually did. I actually had a job that was blocks away from my high school that I spent the night sleeping overnight babysitting this lady's children. And I would walk to school afterwards. And yeah, I did it. I mostly lived in Black neighborhoods. The neighborhood that I lived in where there were white people, I knew that they weren't into Black people. Even though white men were constantly trying to. I had one white man that owned what did he own? He owned a grocery store right across the street from my house. And he was always asking me out. And he would always say, I'll take you to Harlem. And I was kind of like, take me to Harlem? I didn't even know what Harlem was. And so, yeah, I never had anybody call me a nigga until I had my daughter. Yeah. Well, we were living in an Italian neighborhood at the time, and I would get these calls out of windows as I was passing by with her. Niggas this, Black people that. Fortunately, I didn't live there very long, so I didn't experience that for an extended period of time. But 1971, I believe that's when I started college. And I stayed there for about 1.5 years, 2 years. I had her while I got pregnant with my first and only child in college. Well, I stopped because I knew I needed to, I felt like I couldn't do both. And so I just took the time to nurture myself, while I was pregnant and leave college. And I thought I would get back to it, but I never did. We met in an organization called Osira Society. I didn't really make any friends in college, although I would say what was interesting about college to me is that it was really well liked and actually sort of sought after. Because I didn't come straight into college out of high school. I'd been around, I traveled. I started studying African tradition. And so I didn't, I was looked at as somebody who kind of knew some stuff, basically. It was round about 1969, 1970, the whole concept of African consciousness blew up. You couldn't get away from it. The hairstyle changing, African clothing changing, music changing. Music was a really big portal because you had these people that came out with music that was elevating your consciousness, basically. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye. I had a friend when I was working at the Department of Justice. She was white. This girl just wanted to hang out with me. And she was very much into folk music. And so I sought to find the Black folk guy called Richie Havens and got into him. And then she was into hard rock. And so I got into, oh God, why am I not remembering his name? The black guitarist. Actually went to see Hendrix on New Year's Eve with my sister. What an experience that was. He was like the black hippie that you really wanted to know how he came into even this way of, wanting to play this type of music. Because I was very, very interested in, seeing him. So, we went to see him. It was a very good experience. Very important experience, I thought. The stories were amazing. Dick Gregory was pretty instrumental in that, bringing to light a lot. I used to listen to him on the radio when I was in New York, even before I had her. And so that brought up consciousness. But even before I had her, I used to go up to Harlem. A lot of black culture up there. Because Harlem was booming then. There was a lot of stuff going on in Harlem. A lot of spiritual enlightenment and culture and awareness. So we'd go up to Harlem just to kind of get, that insight. I remember, again, me and my sister, we went to see, I remember when the Black Panthers came out, we went to see them at a college in Brooklyn, New York, again. And that was kind of very much amazing because they actually came fully armed. Huey P. Newton, who was at the time the head of the Black Panther Party. So there's a lot going on before I had my child, and then obviously after I had her as well. But the knowledge and the insight and the awareness was well before her. I don't know how they let them even in. I don't think their guns were loaded. I don't see how they would let them into a college facility with loaded guns. But I remember that they stood there behind him, fully well armed. I didn't consider myself a quote unquote revolutionary or Pan-Africanist even, because I didn't really know at that time what Pan-Africanist was. I didn't really find out what a Pan-Africanist was until I came to DC and connected with Ujamaa, Shule, and all that was going on there. But I was feeling, to answer the question, I was really feeling the importance of really knowing our tradition, African history. And so, started reading a lot. They came before Columbus, those books and things of that nature. Spook Who Sat by the Door, started reading those kinds of things to kind of get that sense of us as a people who were transported here. Interesting question. So my mother used to take us to church because my mother played the piano. But after we moved out of a certain area, my mother wasn't going to church anymore. But something happened that got instilled in me to go to church. So my mother and father did not go to church, but I did. We were Methodists. And I remember when we moved, the Methodist church I went to was mostly white people, but again, there was no racism there. And I would get up and Sunday, go to church, get dressed. When we moved from that location to another location, the church was like right down the street from us, and I joined the choir. My mother let me know very, very early on, I love you, darling, but you just can't sing. But they let me into the choir anyway. And so I joined the choir. There was that sense of camaraderie with the church, and there was a lot of young people at that church. And so that was an impetus for getting to know people in the neighborhood, to connect with them, even if I didn't know them, to see them. This happened when I was in high school. So the boyfriend that I was with, that I was badly in love with, he never went to church, but because I started going to church, he went to church with me. And all of the people in the neighborhood, how did you get him to do that? Like, I was going to ask him to come with me. He came on his own. And so, church was a very important experience to me. Very important. It was important to be there. It was important to hear the sermon. It was important to see the people. The energy of the church was very important to me. Oh, that's an interesting question, because I was always interested in other religions. there were times when my mother would go to Trinidad to see her other 4 children that she left there that I didn't meet until I was 12 years old. That's a whole nother story. And she would send us, me and my brother, to live with cousins, to stay with cousins. And my cousins were Catholic, pretty staunch Catholics, I guess they were. And I was totally fascinated with their religion. So I would go to church with them. And, I got into the touch the holy water, make the sign of the cross and genuflect. And every time they said such, you had to stand up, and then you sit down, and you stand up again, you sit down. That was totally fascinating to me. But even before that, when I was younger, I must have been about 9 years old. In New York, in Brooklyn, they used to have these tents, these revival tents that would come around the city. And I snuck into one of those tents one night. I snuck into the tent. I don't even know where my parents were. And I don't even know if they knew where I was. But anyway, snuck in. And that was my first introduction into holy rollers, Baptists, catching the spirit. God, I was totally fascinated. People were moving around that tent and catching the spirit and speaking in tongue, and I was like, oh wow. So that was another experience. But when I became an adult, I decided I wanted to know what the Muslim religion was all about. So I went to a mosque, saw what that was like. So I was always fascinated with religion. That kept me very heightened and aware of the fact that Methodist religion wasn't the only thing that I could know or be interested in and even follow. I didn't follow any of those other religions, but it really just happened. It just happened that the spiritual culture tradition called me. I just felt like it called me. I started studying astrology, herbalism, when I changed my diet. All of those things brought me to a point of exposure to spiritual culture and spiritual tradition and spiritual religion. And when I heard my first class on spiritual religion, it was like this. It was just like, this is it. This is it. Because I had stopped going to church, and it was like my spirit just knew. There was a lot going on back in the early 70s, so you get a lot of people giving classes, lectures. I would go to lectures, I would go to classes. Again, like I said, I would do my own reading. And in your readings, you found that, your ancestors, nothing about Catholicism. They didn't practice Catholicism or baptism, or Methodism. So it was like, wait a minute, this wasn't the initial way in which we as a people worshipped. That, again, started the wheels rolling and sent up all the red flags and everything. Well, even before high school and college, I would say I was a favored child. I think I was favored because up until I graduated from high school, I basically was a pretty good child, even though I had my moments where I was needing to be severely disciplined. Yeah, my parents never had any trouble with me in school. They never got any reports from school, things like that. I had one instance in elementary school where I became keenly aware that my teacher was, at the time you wouldn't say she was prejudiced. You didn't use racist at that time. She was prejudiced. Well, I hung out with 2 other young ladies. One young lady, she was she had all of the looks of an African person, dark skin, full lips, but just loved her. She's just a really nice person. And then there was another young lady that we hung out. We used to just go out to lunch together, and we were in the same class. So there were these other 3 white girls that were in the class. One of them was a refugee from Russia or something like that, blue-eyed blonde girl. And I just knew that my teacher favored her. And I don't remember how this even came up, but I must have said something. And it got back to the principal of the school. I was called down to the principal's office. And when I got down there, my teacher was there and she was crying. what the heck is going on here? And they asked me questions. And they asked me if I thought she was prejudiced. And I said yes. And I don't, I just don't remember anything that happened after that. I don't think she got fired or anything, but I just remember that being a really major piece in elementary school. I was in elementary school. I don't know that I was ever in serious trouble. I'm just trying to, I don't know. Serious trouble is like what? Oh God. Okay, so being in Brooklyn, the wilds of New York, hanging around with this young lady that used to go to the funeral parlors and say that was her uncle. We all went to Coney Island. I went to Coney Island with them. Don't ask me what was on my mind, but my parents were like, it was at nighttime. They didn't know where I was. And I don't even know that I even realized that it was late. When I got home, my West Indian dad, who had spared a rod and spoiled a child mentality, beat the living daylights out of me. And what I remember about that beating so well was that we were in my mom in his bedroom, and there was this round fluorescent light, and he reared up so high on me to bring that belt back down. I mean, he broke the light. The light broke. So that was, I guess, that was my first serious, to answer that question, that was my first serious trouble. Her name was Faye Spain. I'll never forget Faye Spain. Faye Spain she was pretty ridiculed because she's very fair skinned and she had like very light colored eyes, and so, they call her all kinds of names because she was light skinned, which I just never even got that. I never really even figured out what that was all about as a child. She's fair skinned, so what? I'm brown, so what? She's a pretty wild child. It's just something she liked doing. I don't know, because we moved from that place. I never saw that child again. That was over 57 years ago. I pretty much work with guilt pretty strongly now, but I remember that I did this, and I didn't even think it was wrong at the time. I just thought the person was mad at me. So I didn't meet my sisters and brothers until I was almost a teenager. Culture shock absolutely set in. I was New York, I was Brooklyn, I was loud, I was rude, and they were cultured. They were British brought up, because the British had colonized a lot of the Caribbean. And so they were very, very well-mannered people, and I was not. And so, we clashed. We clashed quite a bit. And so my sister, my older sister, one that I ended up absolutely adoring after she went to, to the UK, and when she traveled out throughout the continent, she and I something had happened, and we were waiting for the bus, and she was mad at me about something, so I just got on the bus and left her. And so after I thought about it as an adult, I was like, why did I do that? I don't even know. I don't even have a rationalization other than she was mad at me, so what? So, I really think about it and regret, that we didn't have the opportunity to really kind of hash that out. But we're both very loving and kind to one another now. But that was a difficult time for us. I think it could have been jealousy there, but there was a great disappointment for them because my parents had changed a lot from when they were living in the Caribbean. And they had become very acclimatized to the Western way of doing things. Well, if we just take my father, for instance, you knew he cared about you. He was a really poor communicator. We never tell you that. But I knew he loved me. I just did. My mom, on the other hand, was a very emotional woman. I think my parents gravitated towards their children that they had in America because they had left their children in Trinidad and didn't know them. And so they were really, and it was hard for them to catch up. They were trying to provide, they were working, they would have more kids after 12 years of having out the baby for 12 years. So they didn't really connect with them. And so I think that was really hard for my siblings. My sisters mostly though. My first apartment, being the type of person I was, I wanted to be out on my own. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to be free. So I moved out on my 18th birthday. And I was ready to move by myself, get an apartment, be by myself. But my sister, who was about 3 years younger than me, whom you know, Omari's mother, said, "Well, I'm coming too." And moving out on my own, and my sister saying she wanted to come with me, I was a little bit disappointed and didn't want that to happen. But God knows best, because if she wasn't with me, I would have been in a whole lot of trouble. And when I say trouble, I don't mean like got arrested or anything like that, but there were things that she was, as an older sibling, more knowledgeable about, that I would have to go to her and ask her about in order to not make some of the mistakes that could have been made had I not asked her. So I really needed her there. She was really a good person to be there. She was excellent with money. I was terrible with money. So I made more money than she did, but she always had more money than I had. And so I'd be borrowing money for her till payday. And she was a good resource person for me to live with, because she's very responsible about her life on a certain level. Happy memory? Oh, Lord have mercy. There's a lot of happy memories. I just don't know I don't know how to rank them in importance. I was happy to have a child. I was very happy to have a child, because didn't think I could have children. So I was very happy to have a child. A happy moment was when I traveled to Trinidad. My first time, because it allowed me to see my parents' home, my mother's home. I never saw my father's home. And later on, learned some things about where their home was where some of the first slaves were taken to in Trinidad. So that was a very happy memory. There were some things that happened to me as an adult that made me think I couldn't. Whew. And I probably still don't have the courage to do this, but I think she knows about one of the things, but then there's another thing that I just can't talk about even on camera. It's that personal. And the only people that know about it is my sisters, my family here, some family here, and her father. No, it's just I'm there's some shame to it for me. So for real, my father inspired me, even though he was a nonverbal kind of guy. But he there were certain things that he did, like the fact that he was very much into culinary arts. I that inspired me. The fact that he was very much into music. He opened that portal for me for music. Music is a portal for me. He's very much a jazz enthusiast, but he was a music enthusiast as well. Um, so I was really inspired by him on certain levels. No, even though in the final analysis, the career path that I was in, I learned so much. I really did. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about people. I learned so much about how to deal with people. But if I was to choose a career path, I would have get it in some area of decorating, like home decoration. I like that. I like doing that. Oh, there's always been a market for it. For as long as I could remember as a child, home decoration has been a field of work for people. I think there's a few of them, but one is that I I would have liked to have known how to better manage my emotions and not be angry about stuff, and not let that eat me up. But I also have a regret of being with male partners that I really wasn't into. And I felt like there was some level of there was there was some hurt behind that I administered. That I Yeah. because ultimately I had to end the relationship because I just really wasn't into it. And so, and and there was that, maybe one or two people that were into me. I wasn't into them, and I thought I would try it out, but it didn't work. So I regret that. I regret not. I regret going into a relationship that I wasn't wholeheartedly invested in. It's funny. Trinidad was the best because I was so young. I was meeting my relatives and cousins. It was back in the 70s. There was the Black Power movement was starting in Trinidad. They were very aware. I stayed with my aunt, and she was so glad for her nieces to come and visit her. We played mass and carnival, which was really not my thing, but it was just something that was exciting to see. I got to see a totally different culture, in the making. The food, the way they celebrated. Because I went there for Christmas and I went there for Carnival, and the foods that they ate and they prepared, and just the colloquialisms. It was just a really great time for me, meeting different people, meeting guys again, about society today in general. Amazes. I think for real, that people have invested in Trump. For real. I just cannot believe that anybody who had two brain cells rubbing together could really vote for this man. It's like it just boggles my mind. People in general, because that includes Black people. Because now I saw in the news yesterday or a couple of days ago, the audacity of some Black people to say that they are niggas for Trump. I mean, literally, he had this big T-shirt on and said, "For real." I was like, I couldn't believe it. That's amazing to me. I don't care where the man's from. Trump didn't really come into my awareness until I moved here. The Trump Towers and all that stuff. That I wasn't aware of him as a person of interest. He did not interest me. He didn't interest me even when I became aware of him. The good old days. That's a good question. I might have to come back to that one. Can't think of it because I don't know what the good old days. Oh, I think we communicated more with one another. There was more of a one-on-one. Now people don't talk to one another as much or interact as much. And I think there's a level of miscommunication due to cell phones and texting and things of that nature. And what do sending a email, and we don't seem to want to talk to one another as much, and that might be by design. Mm, I think I'm most proud that I connected with people of higher standards, who well educated, who I was able to learn from. Not necessarily they sat down and said, well, 1 and 1 is 2 and 2, but from observing their behavior, the way they live, their personality, that was a source of great education and contentment for me. Because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I can't connect with you. I think that's the most valuable thing that I've learned, that it keeps me connected to people and learning from people who I don't always embrace their values and their way of looking at things and their way of thinking even, but that I can connect with you based on but there are things that I can connect with you on. That's such a great question, because if I could time travel back to my most favorite place to live, it was when I lived with my mom and dad in a neighborhood that I felt was the best neighborhood ever. And that was in New York. And everybody, around me were people who I could connect with, who I spoke with. It was just an energy field in that on that block, especially in the section of the block that it was an energy there that was just indescribable. It was people my age. There were people from different cultures. There was a real energy that if I was ever to time travel back, that's where I would want to be, I think. God, I was here in Washington, D.C., being a mother, a wife. I was working, I was learning, I was growing. I was really learning a lot, learning a heck of a lot in my 30s. I think that was a learning boom for me because there was so many different ways in which to connect with different ways of looking at things and different teachings and different culture, because that's when I came in to learn about the Akans, came in to learn about African-centered education and what that was really all about. When I came in to learn about more into the Yorubas, and I began to find people even that I knew when I was in New York that was into the culture here. So yeah, that was a great time of learning. I think if that was the question. Don't worry. I was a worrier. Stop worrying. I say that to my 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old self as well. What other people are thinking. Why did I say that? How I could have done that better. Why doesn't that person like me? Those kind of things. That's an interesting question because, quite honestly, I never really thought about marriage in a traditional sense. Having a big wedding. I was really kind of terrified about having a wedding. I did get married. I did have a wedding ceremony, but it really wasn't my thing. I was I would have been fine. Let's say if I went into a monogamous relationship, if we went down to justice peace, you gave me a ring, and we say we're married, I would have been so fine with that. I think the thing about that is that I don't think that the legal aspect of it really addresses what marriage is really about. And so having that piece of paper wasn't important. What is important and what I think ultimately becomes important is that the relationship is able to survive based on um, the love, the affection, the upright character, communication. Those things become more important. A piece of paper cannot give you that. A legal a legal entity cannot give you that, and don't and doesn't teach that. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, my parents stayed together. They had issues, really. It, especially when I was younger, they had their issues. They ultimately appeared to grow out of a lot of the issues. I think what ultimately I saw in that was the dedication to the marriage and to the relationship, to the family. I think those things really became much more important than giving me that ring. I don't even remember my mother having a wedding ring. My father definitely didn't have no wedding ring. Well, I don't think no one is always happy with one person all the time. I think you're going to have those moments where you're just really getting on my nerves, or I don't like that you did that. Um, but that's just one thing. I mean, what's you have to weigh. Wish I finished my education, my formal education. I would have wanted to study because um, there's certain things, quote unquote, that now I'm Googling to get insight on. Like recently, when I've been looking at a program that has been giving me a lot of insight on things and about the British. And the British, they colonized a lot of different colonies, island, Caribbean islands, and they wanted everybody to speak like them, British proper. And boom, it popped into my mind. It wasn't even a romance language. Now there was this thing called romance languages, and I didn't know I don't even know why they called it romance language, but there were only 5 of them, and Britain wasn't one of them. It's like you want everybody to speak like you. You ain't even romantically. People aren't even romantically attracted to the way you speak. So it's just interesting. So I would have liked, that further education. I would like to have further my education. Mm. Stressing, being stressed out about this, that, or the other. I'm laughing because in the Caribbean tradition, they come up with some really interesting terms. So I think in the Caribbean tradition, what I fell absolutely in love with as a person growing up in New York was the different terms that they would use for certain things. Like, and some of it is like they say things like they call your behind your bomb C. Look at how she twisted her bomb C. They would say things like that, or they called crazy things like a term of endearment would be doo doo darling. Who calls people doo doo darling? I don't know where they come up with it, but I think those are things that really endear me to Caribbean tradition. Is some of the terms that they would come up with. Very interesting. I think Christmas was, as growing up, was always very special in my house. We, do the tree decorations, and we'd have the presents under the tree, and just going shopping, and really, really, those Christmas times that you just felt that Christmas energy. It was a real energy, like you feel in the Caribbean tradition, feeling Christmassy. You know, I think going back to parents, I would have definitely wanted to know stuff about my father that I have no clue about. The only thing I knew about my father was my uncles, his brothers, but I didn't know anything. I knew where my mother lived when she grew up. I knew her mother. I knew the name of her father. I don't know any of those things about my father, and so that I would have wanted to know more about him. Mm. Together, give them together, or just individually? Like, what would I give the man? What would I give the woman? Um, uh, to women. So I would say to women, take time to know your partner. I would say that to men as well. I think we have a jump into relationship culture, that people jump into relationships very quickly. They don't ask questions. They don't seek answers. That they're led very heavily by their passion and their energies. And then once those passions sort of become pretty ho hum, I won't even say ho hum, but just become very something that engage in with a person, you got to look at some other stuff about that person, which sometimes is not very pretty, and sometimes and oftentimes not to your liking. And not only not to your liking, but it's like you have to really evaluate, do I really want to live with this? Or can I really live with this? Is this a sustainable, you know, character trait, or are these sustainable character traits that I'm able to really be okay with? And I think it's important because, people have behavior patterns. Yeah. Oh my God. That's funny. I have no clue. I don't remember. I don't remember. It was, nowhere near as what it would be today, but I absolutely do not remember. If I made $200 every 2 weeks, I probably was making a lot of money for that time period. And for my age and for my experience. And for that time, for sure. Your first apartment? Not a lot. Not a lot. My sister, as I said, was very responsible about money. So she took care of all the bills and not took care of them in terms of paying them all. But, she made sure she'd come to me and make sure I paid my half of the rent, my half of the electricity. That's all we had back then because, you didn't have cable, you didn't have cell phones. So I couldn't say. The only thing I would say about that is that the duties and responsibilities that men have in relationship are different than they had when I was coming up. And I don't think the pressure is on men so much as it was before because women are so, I want to say, in demand in the work field, in the workforce now. And I don't think so because women are equally, I won't say equally, definitely the pay is not equal, but there are some demands for women in the workforce. And so that women are able to hold their own financially at a certain level, especially depending on the type of job they have. And so I don't think the dependency is there so much on the man to provide unless she is with child and not able to work and needs his backing. Um, This is what I would say. You want to leave this world with people knowing that you had an upright character, that you were willing to help, to give, to share, to love. I think those are the things that stand out important because all the other stuff you can't take with you. Knowing, education is good, but education doesn't necessarily teach you how to be a loving, kind, productive, sharing person. You want people to remember you for that. That's what I would say to my offspring, to my child, to my grandchild, my great grandchildren. Be a good person.